California and went into hiding, living in poverty in a trailer park. This gal did not have the best life, I'll tell you. Okay? So she leaves New Hampshire because it's just to the point where she can't stay with her mother any longer. She moves back to California and lives in poverty.
Other than California.
I don't know why she did. She moved back to California and lived in poverty in a trailer park. She was not discovered until 2009. Nobody knew where she was or talked to her, basically, until 2009. And when they discovered her, she agreed to be interviewed for a documentary on the 40th anniversary of the murders. So that would have been in 2009, 10 years ago. Okay? This documentary is entitled Manson Through the Words of Linda Kasabian. And you will get a chance to watch this in the next couple days before next week. Linda Kasabian is living in obscurity right now and is in her early 70s. Yeah.
What did she change her name to?
I don't know.
That's the question, so there it goes.
Yeah. So she lives in obscurity. Hopefully nobody knows who the heck she is. Be like Lee Harvey Oswald's wife. You know, who would you want to be known as the wife of the assassin of President Kennedy? Would you want to be known as one of the Manson family members? Now, I'll tell you a real quick thing before we get to Charles Manson. These other family members, there was a family member by the name of Lynette Squeaky, is what they called her, Frome. She pulled a gun and fired at President Ford later and was arrested and is still in prison for that. So she actually fired a pistol at President Ford, one of the Manson family. So they didn't go away after this. They're still out there, so to speak. So anyway, that happened. All right, well, we'll finish up with the man himself, so to speak, Charles Manson. Tell you a little bit about this fellow. Wow, isn't this some story?
What does he look like again?
Charles Manson? Oh, you can,
See a picture of him?
you will in the video. Yeah. Now, he wasn't born Charles Manson. He was born Charles Maddox. And he was born on November 12th, 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. So Charles Manson was born Charles Maddox. And he was born on November 12th of 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, this is how his life starts, so you can figure out how it ended, right? He was born to a 16-year-old alcoholic prostitute.
What?
And his mother went to prison at a very young age as well. So Manson was born to a 16-year-old alcoholic prostitute who went to prison at a very young age.
You can prostitute exist.
What was the year?
That he was born?
Yeah.
1934. Now, Manson's mother later married William Manson. But the marriage ended quickly, and Charles was placed with aunts and uncles in both West Virginia and Kentucky during this craziness with his mother. So she gets out of prison. She marries a guy by the name of William Manson, but the marriage ends fairly quickly. So Charles was placed with aunts and uncles in both West Virginia and Kentucky. Well, he was an interesting child. Things didn't work real well with his relatives, so he was placed in a boys' reformatory. Do we have a boys' reformatory around here?
Boys' school.
Boys' school. Yeah, he was sent to someplace like the boys' school. Okay, so things didn't go well with his relatives. He didn't get along with his relatives either set, and so they sent him to a boys' reformatory. Well, he ran away from that reformatory because he had the goal of finding his mother, which he did, and she immediately rejected him. No wonder he screwed up, right? I mean, this guy's coming from quite a situation. So, Charles Manson runs away from the reformatory. His goal is to find his mother. She rejects him. And he basically then lives on the streets and starts committing petty crimes. So after he escapes from the reformatory, he goes to see his mother. He finds his mother. She rejects him. He simply, at that point, lives in the streets and is starting to commit petty crimes.
How old is he?
Well, by 1952, he's spending more and more time in prison from these petty crimes. So 34 to 52 would be 18, is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. So by 1952, he was spending more and more time in prison. He'd spend some time, get out for petty crimes, okay? Well, in 1955, he marries a 17-year-old girl named Rose, and they eventually moved to California. So in 1955, Charles Manson marries a 17-year-old girl by the name of Rose, and the couple moves to California. Well, what does Rose become quickly afterwards? Pregnant. And Manson resumes this life of crime. This time he starts stealing cars. Okay? So with his pregnant wife, he gets into the crime scene again, and he starts stealing cars. And he gets caught, and where does he end up, Aiden? In prison again, or jail, and his estranged wife got tired of that and left with her child and her new boyfriend. So, tired of Charles Manson and his criminal acts and being thrown in prison, his wife leaves him, takes the child, and goes off with her new boyfriend. Probably a smart move on her part, yeah.
So does he know?
I have not researched it. I suppose you could find out, but I don't know. Well, Manson's in and out of jail for a variety of offenses, including pimping and passing stolen checks. Now, if you're passing stolen checks, you have a check written out to Worland High School for $200. You steal it, you go to the bank and somehow convince them into cashing it, and you take the money. Pretty soon, Worland High School says, "Wait a minute. What's the deal?" And they do a research back and find out who did it and arrest him. So he's in and out of jail for a variety of offenses, including pimping. I think you know what that is. He's got a stable of women that he's prostituting. He's the pimp. He's also passing stolen checks. Well, they had enough of him. You know, he complains that he got sentenced to 10 years in prison in Washington for passing a stolen check. And he always complains about, all I did was pass a stolen check, got 10 years. Well, why did he get 10 years? Because of everything else he had done. You know, if you get in school and you end up in the office all the time, I would think is a discipline problem, which you guys haven't experienced, but my point is, the more times you go in, at least my philosophy was when I did this job, is the more times I saw you, the worse the punishment got. So if you got suspended 5 days out of school because you had your 6th tardy in Mrs. Jones' class, I'd have parents call me and say, well, gee whiz, that's a pretty stiff penalty for, you know, a 6th tardy. It's not the 6th tardy in that class, it's the 38 things the kid has been down here before that. And that's the way the state of Washington looked at Charles Manson, and they stuck him for 10 years in prison for passing a stolen check, which seems harsh, but everything else added up. Well, it was in prison in Washington that Manson sparked an interest in music and started playing the guitar. Okay? So when he was in prison in Washington, he sparked an interest in music, and he started playing the guitar. Now this is kind of interesting. By the time he was released from that Washington prison on March 21st of 1967, he had spent more than half of his life in jail or prison. Now think about it. He didn't get out of prison in Washington until 1967. When did these murders occur? 69. So he did a pretty fast weird up in just 2 years, right? March of 67 was 2 years, April, May, June, July, August, 2 years and 5 months from the murders, right? So he gets out of jail in Washington on March 21st, 1967, and by that time he had spent more than half of his life in jail or prison. More than half. Is that your birthday?
Yeah.
There you go. Now, what did Manson do in 1968? Because he met Leslie Van Houten there, some others. What did he do in 1968? He moved to?
Palm Ranch.
Not yet. Haight-Ashbury. Moved to Haight-Ashbury. And began to gather this group of followers who shared his passion for an unconventional lifestyle, to say the least, right? And he eventually assembled those people that he referred to as family to the Spahn Ranch outside of Los Angeles. So many of the group that Manson was assembling from Haight-Ashbury were impressionable young girls who were quick to believe his ideas and philosophies, also males that were looking for a place to be accepted. Manson referred to all these people as his family, and he moved them to the Spahn Ranch outside of Los Angeles in 1969. Now, during the time at Spahn Ranch, I didn't get into this much, Manson and his followers became obsessed with both religion and music, and they would especially get into those two areas while partaking in the use of LSD especially, and other drugs. So they were into these hallucinative drugs, and they became obsessed with both religion and music. Now, I don't have to tell you this, because I already told you that he had an obsession with the Beatles entitled Helter Skelter, with one of their songs. He had a strong interest in the notion of Armageddon from the book of Revelations, from the Bible. His notions of a race war and philosophies of what would happen afterwards led to the brutal murders at the Tate and LaViade residences. We've already told you that.
But if they were religious, why are they killing people?
Because they wanted it to be blamed on blacks, because he wanted this race war to go. Yeah.
But that doesn't,
So we know all that, right? Well, on January 1st of 2017, Manson was suffering from gastrointestinal bleeding, which means that you're bleeding in your bowel area, right? You got internal bleeding. And they rushed him to a local hospital for treatment. That was just a couple years ago, okay? So on January 1st of 2017, Manson was suffering from gastrointestinal bleeding, and he was rushed to a local hospital for treatment. And he was so weak and ill from his condition, they couldn't perform surgery on him because they felt they would have lost him, and so they returned him back to prison so he could maybe recover and get more strength, okay? So he was rushed to the hospital on January 1st, 2017 for gastrointestinal bleeding. He was too ill and too weak for surgery, so they returned him to prison. Well, what they didn't know is, you know what he had? Colon cancer. And on November 15th, 2017, a few months later, they returned him to the hospital where he died of colon cancer on November 19th of 2017 at the age of 83. So on November 15th, 2017, Manson was returned to the hospital. There he died of colon cancer on November 19th of 2017 at the age of 83. And thus, kiddos, what you have is the Manson situation. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch the next couple days this movie of Linda Kasabian. Okay, I'll start it up here today because what time's the bell ring? 20?
Oh, wait.
Maybe we'll get a little start on it, and then we'll get into the Vietnam thing and tell you about the end of Vietnam. Once we do that, I am not going to test you on this as long as your notebook is full of notes, and that's why I'm checking.
Oh, no.
Not gonna test you. I'm talking about from this particular section. I'll be doing a notebook check for a grade instead. Okay? Yeah.
So, what is
Hallelujah.
That's 2 weeks.
Okay, listen up. Sully has a very good question. You guys are going to be gone the next couple days now that I see where we're at, are going to miss the movie Linda Kasabian. It's just kind of going to be your loss because it's a very good video. Or should I, is everybody going to be back Friday?
Yeah.
Is there anybody going to be gone Friday for anything? Because I know we got track Thursday too, don't we? Let's do this. Let's continue the lecture and finish the lecture on Vietnam, and then let's watch Linda Kasabian when we can all be here to see it. How about that? So you'll need to get the notes. But my point is, I'm not going to give a test on this. I'm going to check your notebooks to make sure you have all the notes, and we'll grade that instead. Because I really want to get to this video of the 60s next week. Okay, because it's awesome.
We graduate, Mr. Barrett, really soon.
Pretty quick. How many school days you got left?
14.
So it is? Oh. Well, of those 14,
Too much.